Yeah, okay. So here's a hypothetical scenario for the two of you, for everybody out in the audience. I think it'll resonate with some of us. You're watching a movie or a TV show, you're listening to a podcast maybe, you're watching YouTube, and everyone starts talking about crazy sex stuff. You know, it's Viking power bottom this, androgynous cat cyborg that, and then suddenly somebody mentions like a really interesting form of sex or sexuality that you've never heard of. You barely know anything about it. You know, say we're talking about like erotic hypnosis, and you don't even know like how to get started or what your Google search terms are. Uh, Tell me, the two of y'all, walk me through your routine. Like, how do you research this? How do you find that thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, oh, goodness. I feel like for me, I grew up exposed to, maybe for better or worse is another conversation, but exposed to a lot of sexual content. So I feel like for me, it was always pretty easy for me to like, I don't know, kind of recognize the very like human, almost animalistic nature of sexual interests, of like, you know, maybe this doesn't necessarily say anything about me as a person, but like, you know, this is making me feel some kind of way. Like I can't just stop feeling some kind of way about it, you know.
So you're embracing it a little bit, like you are watching, you know, Handmaid's Tale, and in a very unsexy context, somebody does something, and you're like, huh. I wonder if like I can't be the only person who has that kink. Like that story kind of resonates for you, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, think how long have humans been on the planet? Like pretty long time. I'm willing to bet out of all the humans that have existed before, there's probably at least one other human out there who's had that experience as well.
As the researcher for ancient sensual arts, apparently, I can confirm humans have been on the planet for a long time, and they also like to have sex.
So, like 6,000 years, long time. Never mind, not relevant. So, I mean, do you find yourself like? Do you just go to Google? I mean, what is y'all's strategy for uncovering some, you know, crazy new sexuality? I mean, sometimes we don't even necessarily know the term for it. It's not necessarily the case that people will think to themselves spontaneously, you know what? I really need to explore more consensual non-monogamy in my sexuality. It's usually a lot more the case of like, oh, huh. So he puts his hand there, and then she, oh, okay. And that's a little bit more difficult to talk to Google about.
The fun thing about Google, though, and here is where my extensive background in research for other topics comes into play, is Google actually is a really, really intelligent algorithm. So what you can do is Google will be able to connect you with things even if you're not using exactly the right term. So the fact that you don't know exactly what it's called should never ever be a hindrance when using Google. If you follow that trail, it will inevitably lead you down there. You just have to think, okay, I'm going to assume other people have also searched for this. How would people describe this in a short sentence, right? What are the keywords here? So you might not know what consensual non-consent is, right? That might not be a term that you're familiar with. But if you type in, say, tied up and enjoying it, you know, people are going, like, you'll probably get a lot of porn options there too. But you will also be getting an article that talks about it, and the term might be in there. Or, you know, so it's an easy way to dive into a subject and kind of explore. It's just you're going to have to do a little bit more than one search.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I'm curious about how that question even strikes the two of you. I mean, maybe it's an occupational hazard of being a sex therapist. Maybe it's an occupational hazard of being a pervert. But I kind of constantly find myself going, oh, wow. Like, I wonder if they make a porn of that. And the reality is they almost always do.
Isn't that rule 34? Is that the right rule? Or is that the one where everyone gets gender bent at some point if you're famous enough?
The challenge becomes figuring out like how to get from here to there, and I don't know. I guess I'm curious if y'all even have that experience of, watching something on TV and seeing maybe an outfit or a relationship dynamic or some sort of like rope or tie or bind or tool or, hey, I really wish somebody would spank me with a whatever it was that Jack Bauer was using in episode 17 of season 3, like those kinds of questions are just like constantly flowing through my consciousness. And it's amazing to live in a time and era where you don't have to just go to like the really shady adult bookstore on the wrong side of town. You have this amazing compendium of information in your pocket. What's y'all's process for exploring that? I mean, are you looking towards porn? Are you looking towards like community, fan pages? Are you going to FetLife? Like, I'm just curious how y'all go about such a thing.
Yeah, I remember when a couple of years ago now, actually this was 6-7 years ago. Jeez. Whenever the bio drama of the Wonder Woman comic creator and the triad that they had going.
You're talking about Professor Marston and the Wonder Women, Fox Searchlight film a few years ago? Yeah.
Yeah. So I saw that, and that was really my first experience watching anything about a romance on any medium that had more than 2 people in it. Mm-hmm. And the dynamic was really fascinating to me because I had heard people talk about polyamory, of course, like that was a topic that some friends would bring up, but it never really I never saw that dynamic like in front of me. So I remember after watching that just frantically Googling, just like, okay, wait, I need to make this make sense. How accurate was this? Is this something that is like attainable? Is this healthy? Is this right? Like,
I can have cheeseburger.
I can have cheeseburger. Yeah, basically, essentially, yes. But yeah, it was an interesting rabbit hole that was inspired by seeing a non-traditional relationship on TV.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for myself, I was lucky enough to kind of come into my sexual awareness back before Fossa and Sesta ruined Tumblr for the world. And I was deep into Tumblr back in the day. So, little baby queers back in the like early 2010s, there was a lot of room for sexual exploration on Tumblr and a lot of sites similar to that. I think the great thing about communities like that back in the day was that they were usually pretty accepting and pretty like sex positive about those things. I know when I was like first exploring, I got caught on to like Lacey Green pretty early on too. And I think that kind of helped myth bust a lot of the like crappier ideas that I might have had instilled in me from a religious childhood.
Yeah, we may be overdue to do like an entire episode memorializing all of the great work that Tumblr used to do. Last week we talked about like what are those adjectives that describe you? Like how do you put your sexuality into words? And I know a lot of my words, and then like the detailed long list that didn't quite make it into the episode. A lot of those words are coming from Tumblr, and just having that opportunity to sort of interact with new ideas. I don't necessarily know that that porn, that our culture in general, that other pieces of our sexuality are geared in that same way, that allow you to have that occasional interaction with something that's just to the left of what you were expecting or were used to.
Yeah. So wait, what was the question there? I guess I missed the.
Yeah, I did as well.
No, I apologize. Just to clarify, I suppose one of the great things about that experience was that you could be on Tumblr looking at things that you were familiar with, that you were interested in, and often find yourself looking at something that was like just to the left of that, just a little bit different, so that you were constantly being exposed to new ideas, to new content, to new creators. And there's not really a great replacement for that anymore.
Yes, I agree with that. I think that for me, I don't know, it's weird because I'm also like, apart from the fact that I love this show, I love talking about this in a very like intellectual way, I'm also demisexual, which is another concept that I had to research a lot of when I first discovered the term. But so a lot of this conversation, I think I'm actually going to be learning alongside the audience, because my initial thought doesn't go straight to sex. So like I could very easily have been on Tumblr and been on a thread that would have been like, oh, this is all like very sexualized. I'd be like, oh, this is very aesthetically pleasing. So a lot of
So you read art blogs for the art.
Exactly, yeah. So and eventually there would be things that would make their way into my subconscious, and I'd start digesting it in that way and be like, oh, actually that very much was a turn on for me. But it wasn't like an initial kind of, oh, I see something that has been sexualized, therefore I register it as something I should or could be attracted to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I maybe suffer from that classic male problem that's like, oh, there's a thing, how can I have sex with it?
Yeah, I think I don't know, it really is sad. I think, like you were saying, Christy, a lot of those platforms that really made it easy for people to kind of explore those interests and those desires are unfortunately silenced by, I know, a lot of efforts that I think probably come from a good place, but unfortunately affect the internet and sexual content and content creators in really negative ways. But yeah, it's definitely a different world for young people now. It's unfortunate because, you know, a lot of the people who wanted to take down those parts of Tumblr and things are also the people leading the crusade against things like Pornhub. But like, nowadays, like if a kid doesn't have a credit card, like they're not going to have a lot of other resources to explore those you know, niche sexual interests.
Well, and then for our audience in general, I mean, if you decide, you know, after listening to a remarkable episode of, I don't know, some podcast, and decide that you're interested in exploring your power bottomness or whatever else, is this something that you're like bringing to your partner? Are you exploring these things on your own? At what point is it the right idea to discuss this with somebody else?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for me, it ends up being very much guided by what turns me on more. Because some things I find I'm turned on more if I can get into my head and just have this imaginary fantasy scenario and not worry about another person, I suppose is a weird way to put that, but not have to include anybody else and accommodate their fantasy. And like it becomes very much of a, this is something I just want to indulge in, right? It's like, it's the difference between going out for a nice meal and getting a bottle of like really cheap red wine and just drinking it all yourself while in front of the TV, right? Like it's a very different, it's a different feel. It's also fun, but it's different. So I think for some things, it's very much a solo act, a solo exploration. And then for other things, like some of them are inherent, right? Like the poly thing would be very difficult to do by yourself. But yeah, I think it's a case by case basis for me.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, though. I think it's awesome to be able to like explore a lot of those things yourself. You know, but like I know for me, definitely a lot of my interests are like context dependent on like, you know, what like the situation is with my partner, like how my partner presents, what kind of person they are, how they're engaging with me. But definitely when you're alone, I think that gives you, at least if you have the freedom to, I understand maybe if you're still dealing with some internal baggage, maybe this is a little bit harder. But yeah, I think when you're alone, sometimes that can be the best. You can really explore without having to worry about another person, like, you know, hitting one of your turnoffs. You can just kind of cruise steadily down the road. You know, it's a gentle increase in the exciting process.
Yeah, not having the anxiety of what somebody else is going to think, or are they going to get it right? Like, even if your partner is super stoked about this thing that you've brought to them, what if the thing about it that turns them on isn't quite what you were looking for? Their angle on it is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. And then there's also being the person who is being approached with a new thing, right? Like that's a whole other side of it, is somebody, your partner, coming to you with something new, whether that's a conversation that happens beforehand or just all of a sudden you're trying something else and you're like, okay, well, this is a thing now. Let's see where this goes. And I don't know. I think it's very important that communication is key here, right? And everybody is upfront with what they want, what they expect. But it's also really nice to be in a position where you trust your partner enough to be like, okay, if they take me somewhere that's a little bit different, we can go there together and kind of figure that out. It's just, always make sure you've got a safe word.